Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Remedy. I'm glad that you were able to make it with us today. We have a special guest. I know you were probably anticipating seeing Pastor D first, but I figure I grace you guys with a much younger, much more handsome face to start off the podcast. So just wanted to give you the younger, more good looking version before we go ahead and get started. But we got a great show for you guys today. We have a financial advisor who's going to be joining us talking about finances, some different things that we can do to improve the income that we have and what we can do as far as saving some money so we can have better wealth for the next generation to come as far as our children and such. So without further ado, I would like to present to you guys the panel. All right. And of course,
I love your intro. The good looking one, huh?
Of course, we have Pastor D still with us and ask him a little bit about how his week has been going. But for the new face that's with us right now, we would like to introduce Mr. Adam Ruderman. Hey,
how are you?
Yeah, we want to take a special moment and thank you for joining us. This time, I know everybody's busy and got more better things to do, but we appreciate you taking a moment to talk to us.
Absolutely.
All right. Just to kick off, Pastor D, how's your week been going?
It's been a very interesting week. I'm still dealing with taking care of the family, bouncing back from COVID. So I'm grateful, nevertheless, that we are bouncing back because I know a lot of people didn't get that privilege. So I'm just thankful, and I'm also praying because, as you can see, a good portion of the Remedy's family is not here today because they are dealing with sickness as well. So we are praying for the best for everyone, and hopefully next week everybody will be back.
And Mr. Ruderman, how's your week been?
It's been a busy week. I actually was fortunate to get my second shot of vaccine this week, and it spent about the next day and a half after that just kind of being a bit tired and achy, and then I got back on my feet yesterday and continued. But even while recovering, I had the laptop with me in bed. And as my middle son likes to say, "Dad, did you write any policies today?" Even from bed, I wrote some policies just for him.
Yeah, most definitely. Work don't stop sometimes.
Work from home takes on all kinds of meanings, no matter what.
I want to give a shout out to our first viewer this morning, Eddie Chargers, joining us on Facebook. What up, Ed? Thank you for being here this morning, my friend. Thank you. What up?
My week was pretty good. I'll ask myself, Kels, how was your week? Week has been pretty good. Got a bunch of people who are sick as well, not just part of the Remedy staff, but like some friends and family that I know here in Atlanta that are sick. So just prayers for health for everybody around the world. And then we can also pray for wealth as well with this episode and what we're talking about today to kind of increase some funds for us. So before we jump into some of the questions that we have for you, Mr. Adam, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what is it that you do?
Okay, so I'm a financial advisor with Allstate Financial. I've been doing this for about 12 years. And at the same time, I'm also a real estate investor. So I have a kind of a dual path. Allstate is the second company that I've worked for. I started with New York Life and received my training. I've got federal licenses and securities of 6 and 63 and various state licenses for insurance. So my practice is a combination of insurance and investments. And one of the things that I like, and one of the reasons I joined Allstate is because we look at somebody's total risks, whether they are property risks like home and auto, liability, and financial.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a comprehensive deep dive into making sure that you understand what your exposures are, and then you're able to choose what coverages you want. We all get bombarded with different kinds of insurance at every moment of the day, and it's a bit overwhelming. Some of it is pretty frivolous. Are you going to get a extended warranty on a hand truck for $18? No, if this hand truck breaks in a year, then it was probably poorly made, because a hand truck shouldn't really expire in a year. So I say no to that kind of insurance. In general, I say no to most extended warranties. But then there's really important kinds of insurance, right? We all know this. Having the proper coverages on your auto policy is really important. You don't want state minimums, because if you actually have a problem and you're in an accident, those are not the right coverages. Same thing with homeowners. And of course, I do a lot of work with life insurance. Life insurance is critical if anyone is depending upon you for income. So I have clients that range from young families just starting out to folks who are approaching retirement or in retirement. And at every phase of life, there are different things to be concerned with. And that is the bulk of my practice, is helping people understand difficult financial topics and concepts, and answering questions and guiding them through that process. There are so many sources of information, it can be a bit overwhelming today. And even with the rise of everything on your phone app, there's still some comfort in speaking to another human being and asking questions and really learning one-to-one on a topic, instead of just relying upon Google and your phone and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, with the pandemic and what's going on in today, it's kind of taken away from that face-to-face, that one-on-one interaction. I got a little bit of background myself. I used to work for Bank of America and Wells Fargo and Fidelity Bank. So I've been a little bit into finance and stuff. One of the misconceptions that a lot of people think when you talk financial advisors, I'll ask you to break it down, is you have to have a certain amount of money before you can have a financial advisor. Is that true? How does someone go about getting a financial advisor to assist them in future plans?
Right. So actually, a lot of financial advisors do want you to have a certain amount of investable assets, they're called. Again, one of the reasons that I think the Allstate system is beneficial for most people is you don't have to have any amount of assets. You can come into an Allstate office and talk to an advisor, and there's no cost for a consultation. In fact, most things we do, there is no cost directly to you, because there are different ways to pay for financial advisors. So most of the work I do, there are no fees charged to the customer. And I spend a lot of time on education. And again, I might start out with a client at a young age, just starting out. There's not a lot to do at that point, but what's important is to lay out a plan and to have a sequence of events that you want to go through step by step. Because if you do the sequence correctly, in my view, correctly, that shortens your path to wealth. A lot of people take steps out of sequence, and it causes them to take much longer to get where they want to go.
Okay. What would be some of those fundamental steps? Where would you say a person would start? They have a job, they normally have a checking and a savings account, and that's pretty much it. Usually the savings account may be $50 out of their check or $100 out of their check. How would you set up the steps for someone just starting off, wanting to save, wanting to budget?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So the first topic that's so important for all of us is debt avoidance. We have so many banks and other forms of creditors marketing to us on a daily basis to lend us money. And it is problematic. So we want to avoid borrowing money. It's too easy to borrow money right now. And it's appealing, but you got to pay it back. And you got to pay it back with interest. And so for a lot of folks, interest becomes a very significant expense. And if you can eliminate interest that you pay out, you're going to save yourself over your lifetime a lot of money, right? Interest works two ways. You can pay it or you can receive it. And you want to be on the good side of interest, which is to receive it. So the first thing we have to deal with is debt. If you already have debt, whether it's student loan debt or credit card debt or car loans, etc., what we're going to do is we're going to make a plan to get out of debt, because it's impossible to really save and invest robustly while you owe money. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create what I call a starter emergency fund. And a starter emergency fund is $1,000 in a separate savings account. And the idea is you put in $50 or $100 a month or $20, whatever you can to get that going, but it's not in your regular bank account. It's a separate account. And the idea is money goes in, but it doesn't come out unless there's a true emergency. Okay. Which means something significant, a transmission, a roof leak, something that you couldn't have predicted in a normal budget for a month.
Medical bills or something of that sort.
Something unforeseen that you absolutely need money, right? And that's just a starter, right? A real emergency fund is actually 6 to 12 months of living expenses. And we'll get to that in a second. Beginning, it's $1,000. And to be honest with you, a lot of people do not have $1,000 in a savings account right now, right? They cannot put their hands on that kind of money without borrowing. So once we've got the starter emergency fund, what we're going to do is we're going to lay out debt in the order smallest to largest. Okay. And some people who might be familiar with Dave Ramsey would call that the debt snowball. I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey on certain topics, and this is one of them. And the reason he does smallest to largest is because when you pay something off in full, you get momentum. And personal finance is 80% behavior and 20% math, right? So folks that say, oh, but you should pay off your highest interest first. Yes, in a perfect world, but paying off $1,000 credit card as opposed to a $20,000 credit card at a higher interest, you get an injection of momentum. And eventually what you have to do when you owe a lot of money is you have to get angry at the situation that you've put yourself in. And that anger will propel you to change your lifestyle and do everything possible to cut expenses from your budget and to earn extra money. And so the goal is to get out of debt fully. So you work yourself through the baby steps. And at the same time that we're doing that, we're also creating a budget, right? A monthly budget. And again, this is something that most people do not do and have not done. You simply take a piece of paper and you draw a line down the middle of it, lengthwise. On the left side, it's all your monthly expenses. So either rent or mortgage, different kinds of insurances like auto insurance or homeowners insurance, if you have escrow on your mortgage, utilities, cable, TV, internet, cell phone, groceries, gasoline, these kinds of things, right? And on the right side is income. You literally plan the budget for that month. You look at the calendar and you say, when is my paycheck coming in this month? How many paychecks do I get this month? Some months have 5 weeks. You might get an extra paycheck. So you put the date down and what you expect that paycheck to bring in. And you add it up, both columns. Are your expenses more or less than your expected income? If your expenses are more than what you expect in income, you've got a problem, right? You're overspending. So there's only two ways to deal with a budget. You got to either cut expenses or you got to increase income. So maybe you need a part-time job. Maybe you got to hit the road and do some Uber or Lyft or deliver pizzas or DoorDash or something like that on top of your current position. Maybe there's things in your budget which you can look at and say, you know, I don't need that. I'm subscribed to, you know, all these different streaming services. Maybe I can cut some of these out. Maybe I'm, you know, visiting Starbucks too much, etc. Maybe I'm eating out, right? Dave Ramsey again. The only time you should see the inside of a restaurant when you're getting out of debt is if you're working in a restaurant.
Well, you may want to sit down again.
A lot of us, you know, we blow money without thinking about it, and it'll dribs and drabs. It's death by a million cuts. You know, the drive-through at Dunkin' Donuts on the way to work, that kind of stuff. Right? You've all heard this before, but it's really discipline,
right,
that creates health in personal finance.
So you said something, Adam, that I wanted to point out to our listeners. You said personal finance. I forgot the second part, but it was 80% behavior and 20%. What was the other part? Math. Okay. That's one of the things that stuck out with me as I started to learn about my expenses and the debt to income ratio and things of that sort. It's all about your discipline, just like you just mentioned. If you don't have enough self-discipline to drive past the Dunkin' Donuts, even if you think you have a couple extra dollars because you think you want that coffee, because there's also differences that we teach our kids from a young age, the difference between wants and the difference between needs. And those same principles continue as you grow into adulthood. But there's the discipline factor that most adults don't have. And we want our kids to have discipline, but we don't have discipline ourselves. So that's very true. I wanted to point that out.
And I also want to say that one of the things that I think Adam pointed out that I appreciate is you have to, sooner or later, you have to pay attention to your finance. You know, because at times we tend to, you know, we go to work and we make the money and we pay bills and we continue to just do this on a weekly basis, but never really take the time to sit there and analyze, okay, what's happening with our money? How much do we make? You know, let's do that budget. Let's really look at things on paper. There is something beautiful about writing things down and begin to analyze and strategize and look at what's really happening with your money. You'll be surprised. And I said this before. My wife and I, we had that discussion when we finally decided, okay, it's time for us to really start saving. And we were thinking, oh wait, how are we going to do this? Because we think we didn't make enough. Until we sat there and really analyzed how much money we are bringing in and where the money is going. To our surprise, we had more than enough. We just needed to be disciplined enough to figure out, okay, this is how much we're bringing in. Every week now, we're going to take $200 or $300 and put it away to put toward a saving or to put away from spending. And we thought at the beginning, oh, wait, we can't do it. But and here's another thing that I realized too, once you begin to see your saving growing, it's a beautiful thing. You want to do it more. So it's that investment or paying attention to your finances has a beautiful effect, because the more you do it, the more positive you become, the more aware you become about your finances, the more money you are able to save, the more you want to do it.
That's the momentum.
Yeah.
You get a positive feedback loop when you see progress.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more, Adam, about the snowball effect that we spoke about, paying your smallest debts to your largest debts. And I know it stands out for some people because they might think I have to pay the biggest debt first because the interest is killing me and things of that sort. Let's break that down a little bit.
So, you know, a lot of us have acquired multiple credit cards, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, not uncommon. You might owe $500 on this one, $1,200 on that one, $3,000 on that one, etc. So you want to put them in order from smallest to largest. And that includes anything you have to make a payment on: a car loan, student loan, mortgage. So the first key is to pay your minimums on everything, right? So you want to be paying all your bills on time. even a couple of days early. If you can, use the automated payments that these credit cards offer you to make sure you don't have any late charges. That's critical. That $35 late charge is a big problem, right? We want to avoid. And again, that's discipline, making sure that you've got the money in the account when that payment comes due. Basically, we don't want any surprises, right? We want to know when these payments are due, at what days of the month, and we want to make sure the money is there. So the first key is everything is paid at minimum. Now, we don't want to stay at minimum, but that's the first key. Now, everything in your budget after minimum that you can throw at that smallest debt, we're going to throw at that smallest debt. So when you do your monthly budget, if you have $200 excess after you do your analysis, then you're going to put $200 on the smallest debt on top of the minimum payment you already made, right? You can make more than one payment in a month. So now that $500 credit card, the minimum was, let's say, $25. So now it's $475. Then you put $200. Now it's $275. So you can see one more month, that's going to be $275 minus 25 is $250 minus 200. Now you're down to $50. In the third month, it's gone.
Paid off. Yep.
Paid off. And you put a line through it and you perform plastic surgery. You take a scissors and you take the credit card and you say goodbye to Citibank, and you just snip it right in half, right? And it's gone out of your life. If you do that, you feel power, because, you know, banks are betting that you're going to pay the minimum and you're going to take 30 years to pay that debt off. If you look at your credit card statement, it shows you by federal law how long it will take if you pay the minimum. And usually it's like 27 years. That's crazy. We don't want to pay the minimum, right? So then what happens the following month after that one's paid off is you took the minimum from the lowest, that $25, you applied it to the next one and the $200. So now you have $225 on top of the minimum for the next card.
Quick question. I got someone from Facebook asking, can you use the same principle for a mortgage?
100%. We'll get there. Because if the only debt you've got left is your mortgage, now we're in a whole nother place, in a very good place. But let's just take a moment. So we work our way through that debt snowball, right? Now, a lot of folks, one of their biggest debts is a car loan and then student loans. And there's a lot of temptation, especially under this new administration, to avoid paying our student loans because we think the government is going to forgive them. If you're down to your last debt and it's a student loan, you just need to pay it because you cannot wait for the government to do that. I've heard from some people that instead of actually paying it, they're going to put that money into a savings account just in case the government comes in. Listen, that's your own personal decision to make. You borrowed the money, you promised you were going to pay it. I say just get going and pay it back and be in control of your life. There's a lot of programs out there where there are these 10-year forgiveness situations. We don't want to be waiting 10 years to get our personal finances in order. If you've got the income and you've paid everything else off, go through and pay off your student loans. The amount of empowerment you get from setting a goal and achieving it is very strong. It tells you that you can basically do anything you set your mind to. Okay, so let's go backwards. So we've gotten now through all of our debt, and we've got no debt other than possibly a mortgage. Now we're going to pause and we're going to build our emergency fund up from that starter $1,000 to 6 months to 12 months of living expenses. So 6 to 12 months of living expenses is not the same thing as income, right? What we bring in a month and what we spend in a month are not always the same number. And especially if you've gotten rid of all your debt, guess what? Your expenses just went down. So now what you're talking about is core expenses. That means rent or mortgage, utilities, cell phone, internet, gasoline, groceries, the basics, right? So now you take a piece of paper and you figure out, what does it cost your household to live in a month? Let's just say it's $3,000. 6 months would get you an $18,000 emergency fund, anywhere from 18 to 36. That's 6 to 12 months. That's your goal. You already have $1,000. So now your next goal is to build from 1,000 to 18,000 in that example. And people say, geez, that's a lot of money to put in a savings account that doesn't earn a lot of interest. True. However, the emergency fund is a form of insurance, which costs money.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not concerned with what we're earning in interest at this point. What we're trying to do is avoid borrowing money if an emergency pops up on us in the future. Because in America, there's always somebody willing to lend us money at a very high interest rate to get us out of an emergency. And when you borrow money at 20%, 22%, 25%, it's very difficult to pay those loans off because the interest is so significant. Like payday loans are the worst. They're upwards of 100%. So that 18,000 in this example is going to sit there. Now it will earn a little bit of interest, but it's going to be the cushion that we need to know that if something happens, it's an inconvenience, not an emergency. We can write a check, we can solve the problem, and then we'll go back to rebuilding the emergency fund back to where it was. But we didn't borrow any money. Okay, so that's critical. Okay, now we've got our fully funded emergency fund. We got no debt other than maybe a mortgage. What's next? Okay, so if you're a renter and you want to own a home, now is the moment where you're going to focus on a down payment saving strategy. Okay, so we want to be buying a house with at least a 20% down payment. 20% is the number to avoid what's called PMI, private mortgage insurance. So when you buy a house with less than 20% down payment, there's this extra cost of PMI, which doesn't benefit you. It benefits the bank if you die or default. They get made whole. Okay, that's called private mortgage insurance. So 20% is a significant down payment. On $100,000, that's $20,000. $200,000 house, that's $40,000, right, etc. But does two things. One, it avoids PMI, and PMI is expensive. It could be a couple $100 a month. So it's not a small amount of money. But two, obviously, it's going to lower the mortgage amount that you're borrowing. So then when you buy the house, here's the rule of thumb. You're going to take a 15-year fixed mortgage. And that 15-year fixed mortgage should be no more than 25% of your take-home pay, the payment. So the formula, again, when you're buying a house is 20% down payment, and that the payment on that loan should be no more than 25% of your take-home pay. If you can do that, and some markets are tricky, you know, there's expensive markets where it's really hard to accomplish that. And so you need more down payment to accomplish it. But what that does is it allows you to pay your mortgage and your other expenses and be able to start investing and to be comfortable.
Quick question then. So now that we're talking about mortgage a little bit, 20% down from what I remember would be more if you're doing a conventional loan versus if you're doing a FHA, which is the first home loan. Could you put 20% down if you still went with the FHA loan, or that's not possible?
So yeah, you get into, when you're in the process of getting a mortgage, all these differences: VA loans for veterans, FHA, conforming, non-conforming. Here's my guidance on that. Mortgage brokers are very helpful, can be very helpful. They get paid by the bank, not by you. So finding a good mortgage broker who can lay out these different options and can compare different banks is very helpful. Generally speaking, again, there's no cost for their services to the borrower. They will run an initial application and credit check on you, and they will determine if you're eligible to borrow and how much you can borrow.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll get you a pre-qualification letter, right? And so before you even go out house shopping, you've got this letter that says you're pre-qualified up to a certain amount. Now, again, temptation and discipline come in. Just because the bank says you can borrow $250,000 does not mean you should go looking for a $250,000 house, right? Try to keep your initial house, especially, under as reasonable a budget as possible. If you can find a house for 150 in that example instead of 250, go for the 150, get it under control, get that payment going, get that history, and if you need to and want to upgrade in the future, you can. But when you go out looking with that letter, you're a much stronger buyer because you're going to put a copy of that letter with your offer. Mm-hmm. So the seller sees, oh, this guy's already been pre-qualified. He's done his homework. If I accept his offer, I have a pretty good confidence he's going to close and I'm not going to be, having any games. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now let's go back to the earlier question about the mortgage. So can you prepay a mortgage, right? The same principle. So with mortgages, we call that acceleration, right? Because mortgages come with an amortization schedule. When you start a mortgage, they literally give you a schedule that shows you how many payments, like a 15-year loan is 180 monthly payments. A 30-year loan is 360 monthly payments. And each month, you can see exactly how much of your payment is going to principal and how much is going to interest. And it's actually a kind of a nice thing to see. Each month, there's more going to principal, less going to interest. Mm-hmm. Every month, it changes by a few dollars.
I was looking at, I'm sorry, I since we are talking about this, I think it's important for me to ask because I was looking at my parents' financial statement, and it looks like the first 10 or 15 years that they were making payment toward that home, $1 or $2 was going toward the principal. It's not until when they are getting close to that 30 years, now more and more money is going toward the house. Can you explain how they go about deciding what should go to interest and what should go to principal? Because it did make sense to me when I first experienced it.
So you're actually, that's a very important point. Mortgage amortization schedules are what we call front-loaded with interest, meaning that the early years, the interest is heavier than the later years. So this is also another reason why a 15-year loan is much more advantageous than a 30-year loan. Because a 15-year loan will start off with a much higher amount going to principal right from day one.
Okay.
With a 30-year loan, which is unfortunately the most common, you really have to be disciplined about putting additional principal down with each payment if you're completely out of debt already, right? So that's the key of getting rid of all the other debt to free up more of your income to go to this. So accelerating a mortgage is just like the baby steps we talked about before. If you do your monthly budget and you have an additional $200 in your budget at the end of the month, can you put that on the principal of the mortgage? Yes, you can. Absolutely. And every time you do that, it's going to shorten the length of time that mortgage will take you to pay it off. So it'll go from 15 years down to 14 years and 10 months. I mean, you'll cut time off because what'll happen is the mortgage recalculates each month based upon the outstanding principal. So you're paying interest on outstanding principal. And if you've paid extra principal than your schedule, you're going to accelerate down your schedule and more of your payment is going to go to principal and less is going to go to interest.
Now, in order for you to do that, do you need to communicate with your lender, with the mortgage, and say, listen, I'm making my monthly payment, but in addition to that, I'm going to be sending you X amount of money that I want to go specifically toward the principal?
That's right. You have to exactly identify that this is for principal payment. And there's various ways to do that. Some people pay their mortgage with what's called a coupon, which is literally a piece of paper that you tear out of a book and you send it in the mail with your check. And on that little coupon stub, you can indicate that it's an additional principal payment. A lot of us pay our mortgages online now. And when you go to the screen, there is also a box that says principal, extra. If you don't specify, what happens is they just assume you're prepaying your next payment.
So they hold on to it.
Yeah. So it just sits on the side, and it doesn't help you in terms of reducing your interest or lowering your cost for the next month. It just sits in this little frozen place, which we don't want. So you have to be very clear with your lender that, yes, this is extra principal, please. Now, once you pay that principal, you can't get it back. So you got to be ready to make that payment.
And then you're still expected to make your next payment, even if you pay that principal payment. So people don't get confused out there thinking I'm making an extra payment. If you selected to go towards the principal, that's going towards the principal. You still have your next deadline, your next due date, your next mortgage payment that you still need to be made. That still needs to be made.
100%.
Oh man. So far we've touched a lot. We touched kind of how to start your budget. Maj, you got something to say?
I do, because again, my parents are getting into that age bracket where some commercials seem to be appealing to them. And one of the commercials that sometimes you hear on television is, I'm not going to say the names, but you can actually, they'll lend you money towards your mortgage. Do you think it's a good idea for elderly people who spend their entire life paying that mortgage to do something like that?
So you're talking about a reverse mortgage.
Correct.
You've got to be very, very careful with these mortgages. There are very limited situations where they can be helpful. A lot of times they can be very destructive. So you've got to really go in with eyes wide open and read the small print and really understand how this loan works and whether this situation will be a blessing or a curse. I'm not going to say good or bad as a blanket. In general, it's sort of like a last resort is the way I would phrase it, because you could have a situation where somebody has acquired a lot of equity in their home. So the mortgage might be $200,000 and the home might be worth $800,000. And that equity might be the bulk of their assets. And so in certain situations like that, it could make sense, as long as everybody is understanding what the rules are of this mortgage. And of course, if there's kids involved, what impact it will have on the children in terms of the inheritance of this house, what their options will be at the end. So the advantage of a reverse mortgage typically is that you can stay in your home and you're not removed, and the payments on the original mortgage are stopped, right? That's the main advantage. In some cases, they also give you literally a checkbook, and you can write, amounts out from the equity in your home, and it just adds to the loan. The key to understand is there's fees and there's interest, and you just have to understand how the fees and the interest and the rules work. Before you sign, you need to have an attorney represent you and make sure that you go in knowing exactly this. And again, if there's kids involved and they're going to inherit this home, they need to understand, is this a good plan to do? Because once the parents who live in the home have passed, now you have a choice to make. You can either repay the bank that gave that reverse mortgage in order to get the house back to you, or you can sell it. Those are really the two options to resolve a reverse mortgage.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, again, we touched a lot of different bases. I have a question coming up for you, Adam. It's from a younger listener. Right after this commercial break, I want to get into that a little bit. You like what you hear? Tell a friend or a family member about the conversations that are happening live on The Remedy. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with somebody that you know. For those that are just now joining us, we'd like to welcome you to The Remedy. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Adam Ruderman, financial advisor, giving us a bunch of gems, a bunch of knowledge on savings, things we can do to budget, how to create more of a controllable financial situation for our household. So if you missed you did miss a lot of information. Let me say that. Definitely go back to the beginning of the show and watch all the gems that he gave us. But we got some more questions that we're going to ask Mr. Adam as well. This one question is coming from Wendy, and she says, do you have any tips for starting college budgeting? And the reason why this question stands out to us as well, because back in the day, I felt like some banks and credit card companies did us young generation a disservice.
Yeah.
What I'll explain is we had this conversation is they will come to our schools and set up booths and say, you can get a credit card and we'll give you this amount, $1,000 to use, and you only have to pay back $25 a month, and didn't really give us all the explanation that you did earlier about the interest and things of that sort. But for our younger listeners who are in college, who don't really have a mortgage, who isn't paying rent or anything of that sort, what are some things that they can do to start budgeting themselves?
Okay, so the most important thing, and you just touched on it, is to avoid the offers of credit cards. This is where a lot of pain comes in down the road. You have a debit card that's attached to your bank account, and debit cards today can do just about anything a credit card can do, except for very limited situations. They also come with fraud protections. So if you get in the habit of using your grandparents' methods for spending money, which is, do we have the money to buy this? Yes, then we buy it. Do we not have the money to buy it? Then we don't buy it.
That's right.
That's what our grandparents did, because guess what? Credit cards have only been around since the late 60s, early 70s. In fact, it was Bank of America, I believe, that was one of the first innovators. When my mother got her Bank of America card, it was like a big deal. So our grandparents largely grew up in a cash society. And, therefore they stayed out of a lot of the problems that we get into today. So being aware of credit cards and that they're loans is essential. So, hopefully a college student can have some type of a part-time job where they can earn some money to pay for basic small expenses, that they incur. But here's the other thing. You don't need to borrow money to build a credit rating. I'm going to let that just sink in for a second.
Yeah. Can you say that again?
Yeah.
You don't need to borrow money to build a credit rating. So, in other words, can you live a happy life with no debt and no credit rating? You can. So this whole FICO score, guess who created that?
The credit card company.
The bank. The banks reward you with a higher score for the more debt you have borrowed and paid back, because it suits their interests. So this goal of having an 800 FICO score has been put in front of us like it's something to accomplish. All it means is that you're really good at borrowing and paying back and earning the banks a lot of interest. Can you get a mortgage without a credit score? You can. There's this thing called manual underwriting, where a bank actually looks at your history of your income and your expenses and your payments to utilities and phone companies, and they can establish that you're a worthy risk to lend to without the FICO score. Now, most banks today are not built to do manual underwriting, and in fact, most of them are pretty lazy. So pulling up your credit report and getting that number is really quick and easy way to assess who they're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't need to have any credit. You don't need to take a credit card. You don't need to have a loan. So this concept, especially for young people, of getting their first credit card so they can build credit so that they can get a mortgage in the future is not true and should be off the table. Okay, so that's number one. And most people just are programmed and educated by banks about this FICO score. Okay, so in terms of budgeting in college, again, can I afford this? Do I have money to buy this? If you do and it's something you need, then buy it, but buy it with cash. And that way, the only price you pay is the initial cost. There will be no extra interest. When we put things on credit cards, a lot of times we end up paying more for that item in interest than the actual thing that we spent it on, because it takes us 4 years to pay for it, which is crazy. Go back to your grandparents, how they handled money. They always, first of all, your grandparents always saved money. Whether they had a coffee can in the cupboard, they had a method for saving money, right? Every time they had money come into the house, a piece of it was put aside.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, again, the discipline. Do I need it? Is this a must-have? Those type of things. Most young people in this generation don't have that same mentality as our grandparents, because we live by a different code nowadays. We want to keep up with the Joneses. So we see what other people have and things of that sort, and we want those same things too, so we can feel we've accomplished and reached certain level to match with those guys.
100%. So the two biggest areas that young people get in trouble with, besides credit cards, so that's the first one. There's three. Student loans. So, and this goes to the point that you just made about keeping up. What school you go to will not determine who you will be in the future.
Say that again.
What school you go to will not determine who you will be in the future, right? So if you can, when you're choosing a college, find a lower cost school, like a state university, instead of a private college, and pay for it instead of taking out loans, you're going to graduate with a degree. And there's very few people who, when they're reviewing your resume to offer you a job or not, are going to hold against you that you went to a state university instead of a private college.
Yeah. Yeah.
So being aware of what college costs and what kind of situation you're going to have when you're done with that degree is really critical.
And I'm sorry, Adam, this is so awesome. I'm listening to you. I'm like, wow, I wish I had enough common sense when I started college to make the proper decisions. And so I feel like those who are watching the show today are in a better position than I was when I was younger. When we talk about colleges and universities and so forth, I think it's important for young people to understand. And you just said it. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where you went to school, as long as you can function and do the job that you are being paid to do. That's all that matters. Another thing I notice, a lot of young people, they rush into moving away from their homes to go live on campus to accumulate nothing but debt. And I'm saying to them, if they are listening today, it's not a good practice. So maybe you can talk about that as well, because again, going away just to live on campus, and then by the time you graduate, you're under $100,000 in debt to start. It's not a good place to begin.
No, it's not a good place. Listen, there's nothing wrong with going to your local community college for the first 2 years while you live at home and have a job. And then you transfer to another institution where you get your diploma from that institution for the next 2 years. It's a really good strategy to have a lower cost college degree. And you've lived at home and you've saved money, and you graduate with either no or very little in the way of loans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, friends of yours who've gone to private colleges graduate with $75,000 to $150,000 worth of loans, and you don't, and you have a 4-year degree, it's a big advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really critical to shop around.
So let me add a couple things here since we're on the subject of college as well. I think it's very important as a high school student that you take time. And that's why they say around junior year, you need to be thinking about what you're going to do come senior year. So that way you have at least 2 years to do research on what what college you want to go to. And then in that time that you're doing research about the college, also do research on what community college credits that you can take at your local community school that will transfer if you know what degree that you want to go to. Because just like Adam mentioned to you, that's a way right there that you can save yourself some money by taking some electives or the intro classes at the community college. And that way you don't get set back because sometimes it won't transfer over depending on where you're going to. Another thing you want to do for the younger listeners who don't want to accrue college debt and want to learn how to budget and things of that sort, basing back to the question that Wendy asked. When you are in high school, you need to work hard in high school to try to get a scholarship. You also need to do research on different companies or people who are giving out grants and scholarship for you to go to college. There's a lot of people giving you money with interest on it. There are still a lot of people giving out free money for students to get better education. So you got to do your research, maybe step away from the friends and things of that sort for a little bit and do your own research on those topics. And what we're trying to say to you here, if you're listening, it will save you in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
10, 20 minutes a day gathering research and information while in high school can save you potentially to when you're in a position to buy a house. You might not be thinking that, but as adults that we are on this show with families and things of that sort, that's probably one of the best practices that I can go back and tell my 16, 17-year-old self when I was in high school.
And don't rely on your guidance counselor to do that work for you. Because they are not going to do it for you. And if they, sometimes they mean well, but unfortunately, meaning well and doing a thorough research is not the same thing. Well, I think what Michael is saying is it's important that you do your research and know exactly what's out there, what you are capable of earning and getting to help offset the cost of your college education.
So you are both 100% right. And in fact, there are internet websites that are devoted to scholarship searches. And every junior and senior in high school ought to be spending at least part-time looking for scholarships that they might qualify for and applying. Because you can really offset the cost of college through scholarships. Is 100% correct.
One of our listeners.
I want to make one point clear, just so you all don't get a misunderstanding of me. The reason that I know what I've been talking to you about is because I've made a lot of these mistakes myself. And that's the reason that I've learned them and I own them. So I'm not talking to you because I've done this perfectly in my own life. I've stepped in a lot of puddles and I have paid the price.
Same
And
here.
The key is when you make a mistake, you learn from it and you don't repeat it. And so I just want to make sure that y'all understand that. Okay. Yeah. I've done things right and I've done things wrong, and hopefully you learn from it. Now, I want to just switch to a slightly different conversation for a moment.
Okay.
And this is something that I learned, and it really changed my outlook. This is the difference between assets and liabilities. So there is a book that's widely known called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And this is the key takeaway from this book, which I highly recommend to read. What is an asset and what is a liability? So very clearly, an asset is something that produces income. And a liability is everything else. So when we think of our home that we live in, it's actually not an asset. It's a liability, right? Houses cost money. They have to be kept up. They have to be repaired. We have to pay taxes and insurance and the mortgage. They cost us money. A rental property that we rent out is an asset because it produces income. Okay. A bar of gold does not produce income. A mutual fund should and does often produce income. So understanding this critical difference between assets and liabilities is huge. Cars are not assets. They go down in value unless you're buying very specific classic cars. So what we want to accomplish is to accumulate assets, because assets help us build wealth because they're producing income, and from that income we can buy more assets. So understanding this distinction was really important in my life, and I own rental property as a result of understanding that. I owned rental property before I understood it, but now I really understand that. Okay. And so that's a really critical thing to understand. So going back to our checklist before, right? You've paid off your debt. You've built the full emergency fund. Now, if you're renting and you want to buy, you're going to now do your down payment saving fund. If you're already in a house, you don't need to do that. You go on to the next step. And the next step is 15% of your household income to retirement. 15% of your household income to retirement savings. Now, if you're lucky enough to work at a company which offers a 401k with a match, that's where you begin. And you have to take paper and pen to figure out what 15% is, because the way 401k is done, they're done in percentages. But if there's two income earners in the house, one might have a plan at work, one might not. So you would use the plan at work up to the match, and then you would go away from the work plan and you would start a separate IRA, right? You can have an IRA in addition to a 401k, or if you work for a nonprofit, it's called a 403b. If you work for a municipality, it's called a 457. These are all just numbers from the tax code. So an IRA can be done individually, and there's limits. It's $6,000 a year. And then after age 50, they allow an extra $1,000. So $7,000 a year after age 50 into an IRA. And then there's two kinds of IRAs, traditional and Roth. Okay. And the difference is how the money is taxed when it goes in and how the money is taxed when it comes out. My preference is a Roth IRA. So Roth IRA, when you put money into it, it's after tax money. So you don't get a tax break in the year that you make the contribution. It grows tax deferred, but when you take it out later in retirement, you don't owe any tax. So the Roth IRA has an income limitation. It's about $200,000 a year for couples. It's about $115,000 for individuals. So if you're lucky enough to earn over those limits, then there's other strategies. You can't have a Roth IRA. But you can have what's called a backdoor Roth IRA, which I won't get into today, but it's a technique that high income individuals use to take advantage of tax codes.
Quick question. Okay, I'll let Monty go. I got some.
It's a question. I think I need to ask it because it kind of goes back to something we were saying earlier, but it just came up in my head. I wanted to know if you could give me your thoughts on cryptocurrency, because that's something that is big out there right now. And a lot of young people are falling into the trap as well, just as we did when we fell into the trap of credit card. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I was gonna ask that same exact question. I was just because a lot of the younger generation feel as if those accounts, those traditional IRAs and Roth accounts and things of that sort, even savings accounts, don't give them enough return or as much of a percentage that they want back for money that they're going to put it away. So now they're to, I could put money into Bitcoin or this, that, and the third and get, a certain amount higher back faster. So what do you say about that type of stuff?
Okay, good conversation. So first of all, a good mutual fund portfolio can give you a returns on average of somewhere between 10 and 12% a year. Okay, there's mutual funds that have done more than that over their entire lifetime. So having a good advisor help you understand mutual funds. So what is a mutual fund? Just real quick, it's a basket of stock. So one mutual fund might own 100 or 200 or 300 companies. The S&P 500, the Standard & Poor's 500, are the 500 largest companies in America. So when you buy an index fund of the S&P 500, you actually own a piece of 500 companies. Okay, and the S&P 500 performance is tremendous, and it's a very low cost fund to own, and you can get great results. Some years are going to be down, some are going to be up. About 2 out of every 3 years are up, and the average long term is excellent. So first of all, understanding mutual funds should be on your list. If you don't know anything about mutual funds, there's great websites and there's books, and an advisor can help you understand. Okay, so within a portfolio of investing, okay, so now we're out of debt. We've got our emergency fund, because we're not buying crypto if we owe debt on credit cards. Okay, we're not buying stocks or mutual funds if we are in debt. Let's just be clear about this. There's a sequence. And as painful as it might be, you've got to pay the dues of getting yourself out of the hole you dug yourself into. So out of debt, emergency fund in place. Now we're talking about investing. Okay. So of the total portfolio that you're going to invest in, some of it can go to speculation, which is what cryptocurrency is today. It's still speculation. It doesn't have a long track record, but it could be worth something. We don't know, really. Depends who you talk to, right? The projections for Bitcoin are tremendous. So here are the rules of thumb. Cryptocurrency should equal about 1% of your net worth. 1% of your net worth to get going. And what's a net worth? Let's talk about net worth. Net worth is everything you own minus everything you owe. Got to do it on paper. So you add up everything you own, the house, the cars, furniture, electronics, bank accounts, retirement plans, any kind of investments. And then you add up everything you owe, mortgages, credit cards, student loans, auto loans, everything. And you subtract, and that's your net worth. Here's how I actually present it to most of my customers. Let's say you are going to move to Belize, the Central American country, next month. And Belize has a rule. They only allow you to bring 2 suitcases. One is filled with clothing and one is filled with cash. Everything else you got to buy when you get there. So the cash suitcase is everything you own here in the United States. You're going to have a massive yard sale, garage sale. You're going to sell everything. You're going to go to the bank and you're going to liquidate all your funds that you can take out legally without getting arrested. And all of the money from the bank accounts, the retirement accounts, and the selling of the yard sales going into the suitcase with cash. You now own nothing. You're in a hotel. But when you go to Belize, it's actually a nice hut on the beach and you got beautiful weather. So it's a whole different story. You don't need anything. Okay, so that's net worth. So 1% of your net worth can go into crypto. So let's just do the example. If you have $100,000 net worth, that means $1,000 of crypto. So here's this story. If you lose 1% of your net worth, you're not going to be really negatively impacted. That's not a lot of money. Now, if you've got your 15% going into retirement in mutual funds and you've got your debt all paid off and you still have some more money and you want to increase beyond that, you can. However, crypto or any kind of real speculation shouldn't be more than 10% of your total investment portfolio. So if your portfolio of investments is $50,000, $5,000 of it could be in speculative stocks or in cryptocurrency.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely a portion, a small portion, small percentage.
I mean, listen, if we're in good shape, we don't want to miss out on the boat, but we also don't want to dive full into waters that are unknown.
Correct.
But what I think is also important that you stated is your debts have to be paid first. Let's take care of the debt that we owe. Let's make sure we have the saving, the emergency fund, in case while we're investing, something happens, we're still covered. We still have that part. Now we're in a better position where we should do some investments. To kind of go back into, sorry, you were going to say something?
I was going to say everything that we're talking about here today is about building a strong foundation of financial security. And you can look at it as a pyramid. When you have your foundation in order, then what you're doing as you go up the pyramid is you're going up higher risk. So you start with things that have low risk and that puts you in a strong position, such as getting out of debt and things of that nature. As you go up the pyramid, you're taking on higher risk, like cryptocurrency, like other investments, like rental property. All these are different kinds of things to help you build your wealth long term. But you have to start with a solid foundation. So solid foundation is basic kinds of insurance with good liability limits, car insurance, homeowners insurance, life insurance. We haven't talked about life insurance yet. Very critical. If you have anybody that's relying upon your income, you need life insurance, right? So if you have children, you're married, and you're making you're working, and your income is important, life insurance is critical. And that can be done at any stage of what we're talking about, of getting out of debt, right? Because term life insurance today is very inexpensive. The competition amongst carriers is tremendous. And unless you're not healthy and you wouldn't qualify, term life insurance is very reasonable and you can fit it into any budget.
Adam, now that we are talking about life insurance, can you talk a little bit about, because sometimes you hear it on the TV station and why not, and there seems to be a confusion because they'll say, okay, let's say you have a life insurance that you're paying $150 a month or whatever, but they say guarantee for 20 years. What does that mean? So what happened after 20 years paying that $150 a month? How significant is the increase going to be? Because a lot of people are afraid they spend 20 years paying on a life insurance, and then after that they increase it so much to the point now they can afford it, so they just lost $150 for 20 years that they were paying to a life insurance company.
Right, that's right. And so what you're talking about is getting to the distinction between different types of life insurance. So there are two main categories of life insurance: temporary and permanent. Temporary life insurance we call term insurance, and the term refers to the number of years that the premium stays the same. So we talk about 10-year term, 20-year term, 30-year term. Okay, when you're first getting life insurance, typically that means you're a young family. Maybe you've just bought a house, maybe you've just gotten married, maybe you've just had your first child. A lot of people don't even understand life insurance until they've had their first child. I was one of those. Okay, so my first policy was a 20-year term policy. Guess what? My firstborn is almost 17 years old right now. That means I've got 3 years and change left on that policy. So it's to your exact example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the good thing is it's fairly low cost because I was 17 years younger than I am today.
Mm-hmm.
So when it gets to the end of 20 years, I have two choices. Well, three. I can cancel the policy and it goes away. I can pay the extra premium that the insurance company is going to charge me because the initial term is done, and now the premium will go up.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll send me a letter a few months ahead of that time and say, hey, instead of $50 a month, your premium now is going to be $85 a month. And then some companies, it's going to increase each year. Some it'll increase, there's different schedule. Or the other thing that they'll say to me is, you can convert this term policy to a permanent policy without any extra health underwriting. Now, if you've had any health issues, you may want that because you couldn't qualify for a new policy right now. So again, cancel, pay the higher premium, apply for a new term insurance if you're still healthy, or look at converting to a permanent policy. I won't go into it right now because it would be enough for an entire show. But within permanent life insurance, there's like about 7 different varieties that we would talk about. And we're talking about whole life, universal life, variable universal life, etc. And you get into all these different points.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a purpose and a use for permanent life insurance. At a minimum, what I typically recommend to my customers is that they get themselves at least a small permanent policy as young as they're able to. So, for example, $25,000 could be a whole life policy or what's called a lifetime universal life. So that policy is fixed for their life. Their premium won't change and the death benefit won't change. And that's just for final expenses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that $25,000 is for final. So when you buy that policy when you're in your 20s, it costs very little. If you have the ability to buy it for your children when they're, young, like 3 or 4 or 5 years old, it's really small. And again, you're locking in that premium for their entire life. If you try to buy $25,000 of permanent life insurance for a 65-year-old, it's going to cost a couple $100 a month.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you're much better to do it as young as you're able to and then budget that. And actually, those policies do build some value, but it's not a tremendous amount. But that's at a minimum what we recommend. Now, if you're in a different position where a permanent life policy can become part of your investment portfolio, that's another conversation that we can talk about. Because again, there can be uses, but going back to your earlier topic of reverse mortgages, they're very specific. So we don't want to say that permanent life insurance is for everybody. You certainly have to have the right amount of income and expense ratio to make that worthwhile. For most people, term insurance is affordable and it does the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, again, Adam is just giving us more and more knowledge. As he stated, he stepped in some puddles before, so that's how he knows all this type of stuff. So we want to take a moment and again, thank you for joining us. If you could just give us your email, if you don't mind, Adam, for people to reach out to you if they have some additional questions, we'll love to put it down here. And I think we have one more question from Facebook that I wanted to get to kind of before we wrap up. Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Adam. That's your email right there. For those who want to reach out to Adam, he will answer some questions to the best of his knowledge when he has availability. He also is very busy. If you can't reach Adam or if you sent something to him and for some reason he hasn't gotten back to you in time and it's something that you really want, reach out to us at theremedywithpd@gmail.com and we will try to get in contact with Adam for you. I'll put Adam's email back up here as well. I got a question here for you, Adam, again, kind of before we wrap up. It's from Eddie Charger. See if I can pull it up here. It says, what should you do to build personal credit before buying a house? I know you spoke about before that you really don't need credit incense if you put enough cash and stuff down and so. But if a person is looking to build their personal credit, maybe they don't have a lot of credit, they don't have a lot of credit cards or anything of that sort, but they're wanting to buy a house, what can they do?
So you have to make the decision in your own life whether you're going to borrow money. Okay, it's a big decision. And again, we get how many offers every day from creditors to borrow money. Why do they do it? Because they earn a lot from lending us money. So let me just say again, you don't need to borrow money to qualify for a mortgage. The way you do and put yourself in a position for mortgage is to have all your debt paid off, have your emergency fund, have a good job and good income, and pay your other bills on time, like your utility bills, your phone bills, all your bills. You can find lenders that will do what's called manual underwriting, and you will qualify for a mortgage without having any debt. That being said, if you want to get yourself a credit card and manage it correctly, meaning pay it off monthly, that will build you some credit as well. But it is not a requirement, because there's people with 0 credit scores who can get a mortgage, and it's because they've put themselves in a strong position to put on the application. They owe no debt. They've got money in their savings account. They've got a good job, and they've been at that job for a few years. All their bills are paid. The bank looks at all that. Now, again, not every bank can do this. So you sometimes will have to find the right bank, but they are available.
What about, this just came to mind when you said the word jobs. What about if a person is self-employed and they're working on their own businesses and things of that sort? Is it more of a risk for them? Are they looked at as more high risk or so?
So I'm a big believer in entrepreneurship, right? I've been a lifelong entrepreneur, literally since the age of 10. I was my older brother handed me down his dog walking business, and this was in New York City, and this was 1976, and a law got passed called the Pooper Scooper Law. And you had to clean up after your dog all of a sudden, right? So all of a sudden I was walking 3 dogs, and I now had a waiting list of 10 dogs, and my rates doubled overnight. I had arranged for a bunch of my friends to start working for me. I had informed my parents I was dropping out of school, and I was pursuing this business full time. I was 10 years old. Now, because they had some sense, they talked me out of this plan, although I'm still convinced it was a good plan.
It was a good plan, back then.
Because, I walked, and they wouldn't let me hire anybody. I had to do it myself. So I walked dogs in the morning before school and after school. And, because of that, I never needed an allowance. I always had cash money. And, so this is a whole nother lesson. Again, we could spend a whole show on. With kids, it's important that they understand how money works. There's 3 things you can do with money.
Yeah.
You can spend it, which you should do some of. You can save it, which you should do some of, and you can give it, right? And you got to learn all those 3 things: spending, saving, and giving, because developing a generosity muscle is important. Because if you follow all the steps that we're talking about, and you get to the end of the road where you don't even have a mortgage payment, you're making good money, you have no debt, you're investing, you want to be generous, and you want to be able to help people, because guess what? Helping people and being generous, it's for you more than it is for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where your soul and your heart come from, and it fills them up.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of folks who have gotten to that place, they talk about that as the thing that makes them the happiest, is when they can give generously, and write big checks for causes that are important, or, give bicycles away to a neighborhood of kids. Those are incredible things to be able to do. So yeah, we could talk a lot about that, but that's for kids, there's a whole subject of whether they should get an allowance or a commission on doing chores. You want to build into them this idea of, where does money come from? It comes from work. It doesn't come from a handout. And if you can build that in from the earliest age, it's like my grandmother taught me: when I was broke, there's a good place to go, to work.
Yeah.
And, from my earliest age, from that dog walking at 10, I just kept working. I've enjoyed every single job I've ever had. My first real job was in a restaurant, right? I was a busboy. And I learned a lot. And I learned how to deal with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you build your way up. My 16-year-old has been working as a busboy and he saved enough money to buy his first car.
Very nice. Very nice.
Oh, actually, this is a good point. Let me just make this point, especially for the young people out there. Do not get a car loan. Buy as much car as you can with cash and upgrade it as you're able to. And I'll just tell you, if you don't know what car to buy, start with a Toyota Camry or a Honda Accord.
They last, yes.
That's it. Buy as much Toyota Camry or Honda Accord as you can afford. They last a long time. They're easy to maintain. They're not expensive to repair. So there's no shame in driving a $2,000 Toyota Camry or Honda Accord, or even a $1,000 one.
Yeah.
And then guess what? Save up in a separate account, sell that car, combine it with your cash, buy a better one, a newer one less miles. It doesn't matter. But own a car with cash from as early an age as you can. Do not get a car loan ever in your life if you can avoid it. And if you have one now, pay it off and never get another one.
It's funny that you say that, Adam, about what your grandparents told you. The other day in my own house, I had about $3, I think, left over in my pocket as I was clearing my pockets out when I got home. And my daughter, who's 8 years old, and she's like, "Can I have the money? Can I have the $3?" So I went and handed it to her, and my wife moved my hand out the way, and she's like, "Did she earn that?" And the face that my daughter had on her face was like, "I can't have the money." And then my wife kind of got into, "No, you got to work for that. We have a puppy here, so it's like if you continue to walk the dog without us telling you that you have to walk the dog, that's how you earn your allowance. That's how you earn the income and things of that sort." So,
okay, so I like your wife.
Yeah.
So she's talking about a commission, right?
Yeah.
Your daughter did work and she earned a commission.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting how, I mean, Markel and I were brothers. And so growing up, I can't tell you how many times I remember things that we wanted, but we could never afford. And my dad is not the type, just because you want something, he has the money, he's going to buy it for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of working and being disciplined and earning a job and making money and to be able to buy the things that you want and so forth was installed in us at a very young age. And it's interesting to me how today kids feel almost like they are entitled to things. You look at the generations today. I have some Generation Z's that they just ask you for, and it's not a small amount of money. They just ask you for a big amount of money. And you're like, you know, I don't have a tree in my house that's growing these things. You know, so it's important, because for me, what I've learned, and it's funny you mentioned about that Toyota Camry. I know exactly the kind of car you were going to say, because that's what my dad told me.
Yeah.
He said, listen, get yourself a Toyota Camry. It will take you from point A to point B. And guess what? He was right. So we get into this idea that we have to have the latest this and the latest that, and we constantly upgrading our phones and constantly buying the next new things and so forth. It's I will say it's a privilege that is not worth it. It is really not worth it, because you can spend all your money on all these gadgets and all these things, but you still have nothing to show for. So make sure you understand the value of money, and that's something that is installed to you as a young kid. The value of money, that you earn it. And I learned, for me, when I work hard for something, I'm very careful how I waste it. You know, I'm still using this old phone here, and every now and then I'm looking at it, I'm like, you should upgrade. But I'm like, no, why do I need to upgrade for? The only thing I use this phone is to make a phone call and sometimes check on Facebook or Instagram. That's it. Everything else on that phone I don't use. So why am I upgrading to a $1,200 phone where I can keep the one that I have?
So you're making a great point. And I think for all of us, when we're driving down the road or we're looking at other people, I can't always help myself. When I look at somebody just driving an expensive car, I say to myself, do they have a car loan, or do they own that car outright? Because if you're driving an expensive car with a car loan, that's a sham. If you're driving a Toyota Camry but you own it outright, that's a good thing.
Yep. Yep.
And in fact, a lot of people have a lot of loans that you don't know behind the scenes. It looks like they're living a big life, but they're living an undisciplined financial life. And they have a lot of, concerns that when you're doing your thing and you're out of debt and you're living disciplined, you have peace of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you
And
put your head on the pillow, you don't have those concerns.
correct. And the peace of mind, you can't purchase that at the bank. You can't get that on credit card. You can't. Well, I'll take it away. Wow, what a show.
Yeah. I think we've learned so much here, and I think I just wanted to type this in. I think for everyone to have financial freedom, to achieve financial goals, what Adam just stated and said, live a disciplined financial life, kind of sums up everything that we need to do as far as how to start, how to put a savings account, emergency fund together, how to go about paying our mortgages and things of that sort, to continue to save and not pay interest, not pay extra money out where it's not needed. Difference between assets and liabilities. All those type of things are broken down. But if you don't have the discipline to maintain what you have and stay in certain parameters, you will fall back into debt. And that is not where you want to be. So again, from us at The Remedy, Adam, we thank you so much. We appreciate you taking your time. I'll go ahead and add your
Thanks
email.
for having me.
Yes, sir. I'll go ahead and add your email one last time. For those who want to reach out to you, they can. And we'll just say a quick prayer if you would join us, and then we'll end our show.
Father God, I just want to say thank you for Adam. Thank you. We couldn't pay him enough money for him to come and to do what he did for us freely today. And so I just pray that you will bless him, bless his family, and to those of us who are able to sit there and listen and learn from him, may we use the skills, may we use the knowledge that we have in our own household and teach our kids so that they too can have a better disciplined life when it comes to money. Bless us, Father God. Help us not only to have, but to be like Adam said, Lord, there's something wonderful about giving and blessing others. So help us not only to be able to be financially sound, but to use the gift that you give us to help out those who are in needs. We love you. We thank you for such a wonderful show. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 All right, everybody, have a good night. We thank you so much, Adam. From The Remedy, we are signing off.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam.
Take care.